This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Jackie O and you're listening to Militantly Mixed.
Yo, this is Shanghi from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
I would like to acknowledge that the Militantly Mixed podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Karankawa people, and I wish to pay my respects to the people of that nation, both past and present.
Hey y'all, welcome to Militantly Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Charmaine, aka Mixed Girl Maine, the busiest mixed race, bisexual, polyamorous, atheist, comic book nerd, cat mom, mask making, Gulf Coast Cosmos comic book co-owning, Asian American Podcasters Association's Golden Crate Award winning podcaster in this podcasting game. I want to keep this intro short because the episode runs long. I am joined today by Naturally MonaLisa, repeat guest, fellow mixed Asian content creator, fellow comic book nerd. Go check out Naturally MonaLisa on Instagram and on YouTube. Her shows are about natural cleaning supplies, hair care products, skincare supplies, because as a person that suffers from eczema, she wanted to know what to use that was all natural and safe. So she reviews and talks about those products. She also showcases her learning multiple languages at the same time. She also translates with other people. She translates BLM content into Cantonese to try to help reduce the barrier that Cantonese speakers have to understanding what is going on with Black Lives Matter here in the United States, which I think is awesome. We are also co-creators along with Asian Soph and Rohan Jolie on a Black Asian Solidarity workshop that we, I guess, debuted at the Midwest Mixed Conference back in August, and we're hoping to, continue to shape it and form it and release it in the future in other venues as well. Yeah, so Naturally MonaLisa, she came back to chat with me about the Marvel movie Shang-Chi. So yet again, this is not a regular episode of Militantly Mixed because we're not talking about an individual mixed race experience, but I thought both as, well, for me as a nerd, but also as a person of mixed Asian heritage, I wanted to speak to other Asians about how they felt about the Asian representation that is in Shang-Chi. And even though, my Asian mix is Japanese, I still feel a sense of representation with this movie, and I'm excited to see an Asian superhero in the form that, in almost any form. But specifically, what I'm excited about with Marvel introducing Shang-Chi to the MCU is that we have an Asian superhero that is not going to be viewed at, treated, or looked at as an exotic other. I think they really did a great job of making Shang-Chi fit into the superhero role in the same level, energy, and experience as T'Challa, Black Panther, Iron Man, Thor. I think they did a great job of doing that. And I wanted to talk to other. Actually, I still want to talk to a lot of other Asian folks about how they feel, especially nerds that have read comics before too. The connection between the problematic past of comic book characters of color that were created by white people in the past, and what they've done to address those issues in the comics now, and how they're addressing those characters that have those difficult origins in the movies today. But Naturally MonaLisa and I got into that on this episode. And the biggest thing that I realized in this process of looking for people to talk to about this is that my nerd circle is predominantly Black. I got a couple white nerd friends too. I don't have as many Asian nerd friends, or at least if I do, that's not how we engage. So I was able to talk about this movie with a bunch of people, but oddly enough, I've only able to talk about this movie with one person that also shares Asian heritage, and that is MonaLisa for the episode that you're about to hear. I do have a few other things I want to talk about, but I don't want the intro to be too long because the discussion runs long. But one thing that I want to address is that throughout the course of this conversation, while we do mention Awkwafina as being an actor in this movie, and we talk about the good job that they did in this movie, we failed to really discuss Awkwafina's problematic past with her cultural appropriative character of Awkwafina, the character Awkwafina that she plays. Her real name is Nora. She is of Chinese and Korean heritage. She grew up in Queens, and she grew up with white adjacency. But the character she created of Awkwafina was a way of getting friends and attention and things like that. She has talked about that in the past. So she adopted that black accent or blaccent and stuff. And because she's an Asian person, she got attention because of it. She doesn't address this in a very satisfactory way, to be honest. And I don't have an excuse as to why it didn't come up in our conversation. I think we were both so excited about the movie itself. And honestly, she does such a good job in her role that it erased me thinking of her that way while I watched it. I have had a couple conversations about her in Shang-Chi with her past in the process, but I just never got around to it. Honestly, I can't make an excuse. I don't know. It just didn't come up until very, very towards the end after we had already been running long. And so we talked a little bit about it offline. So I only say that here to say that I'm acknowledging that is a failing on my part that I didn't bring it up, especially as the host of the show. I should have led us into that conversation a little bit, since MonaLisa and I both are of Black and Asian heritage, but it was a failing on my part. We mostly just talked about the Asian representation, the Asian American representation, undoing certain stereotypes, how they dealt with certain Asian stereotypes that exist here in America, things like that. And so, you know, that was the focus of the conversation, and we didn't get around to discussing Awkwafina. I could talk about it in a future episode, or I will probably talk about it on Blurred Comics, my other show. But yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that I do think of it as a bit of a failing on my part, but I don't have an excuse for it. If you've tried to email the show in the last about 12 days, so today is September 12th, I have had a problem with my email server that finally got resolved today. I have been able to send emails, but I haven't been able to receive emails, which is so weird. And I finally figured out that no one was replying to my messages about being a guest on the show. I got a little sensitive and realized that it wasn't me, it was my email server. So that's been fixed. So if you have sent an email since September 1st, please resend it because I didn't get it, and I'm not going to get it even now that it's been fixed. It's not going to backdate the items. And yeah, I have a couple other things to bring up, but I'm going to save it for later because I really want to get into this episode. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our return cousin to the Militantly Mixed podcast, naturally MonaLisa, and go follow her on Instagram and YouTube. So today I am rejoined by a longtime cousin of the show, MonaLisa, aka Naturally MonaLisa on the YouTubes and the interwebs. And we decided to get together to chat about Shang-Chi as mixed Asian people and also nerds that are really into comics and comic book stories and things like that. So thank you for coming back to chat with me about Shang-Chi.
This is exciting. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, I'm all game. I'm all about superheroes, reading comics, and it was a great weekend to be able to finally watch it after, being postponed by the pandemic for so long. So it's really great to finally be able to watch it.
So I mean, it's no secret on the show that I'm a big comic book fan, and the fact that I've moved out of state just to open up a comic book shop. Like, I'm about this life. I don't care if someone becomes interested in comic book characters because they watch movies, or if they're comic book readers who like movies and read comics. I don't care how you approach comic book geekdom. I am not here to judge or put people down, because I see that happens a lot with so-called comic book fans, actually like treating people who are fans of the movies lesser.
But I feel like the fact that we read comic books, we have a certain level of knowledge that other people don't.
And we can thanks for folks.
You know, we actually have other types of source material that we are aware of. Yeah. And, you know, that may be difficult for people that only watch the movies or shows to understand. Like, I feel like our geek is like another level because we also read comics.
Right. No, absolutely. I say that first part just to say, because I have talked to a few people and I've done a few interviews and things like that about comic related things. And I can tell that the way they're approaching me is because they've watched the movies and they're assuming that movie is canon. And so I want to put it out there to say that I really don't care how someone accesses it. If it gets people interested in comics and comic book characters, I'm here for it. That being said, as a comic book fan and a comic book reader, and now a comic book shop owner, I know that we can provide background and things like that, and especially like how it fits in the universe of Marvel or anything like that. That we can share too. The difference here is until they announced that they were going to be doing a Shang-Chi movie, I was only peripherally aware of the character. Mostly because...
Me too.
Like, mostly because of the Mandarin. I remember the Mandarin from being a child and being like, ugh, this is giving me like, and the whole Fu Manchu thing. And it's just, okay. All right. Okay. So one thing that I always say about Marvel is that Marvel does try to address its problematic past and make adjustments while still trying to hold to, not trying to erase what they did. You know, they're not like, oh, you know, we're just going to delete that and hide from our history. They actively try to address it in different things. And what I'm less familiar with, because I've only recently just started to read Shang-Chi books, is I don't know how they did it yet in the transition of the books. But I know what they did for the movie, because I've been listening to the director and the writer and Simu also talking about doing this movie. So I feel like Marvel, and I know this to be the case on the Black side too, because I was very aware of what they were doing when they were creating Black Panther too, and how they were addressing things from the past and letting Black people take control of the story and the creative universe surrounding Wakanda and Black Panther. And they've done the same with Shang-Chi. So why don't you just do a little bit of background about your level of fandom and your access point, and then we can get into it.
Level of fandom, well, like my interest in comics and superhero.
Yeah. Like, how do you geek, basically?
How do I geek? Well, I geek the hardest for Batman. I've read and watched Batman the longest since I was a kid. I've watched all the Batman movies from 1989, 1997. God bless the George Clooney's version. And
what? Oh my gosh, we got to get into that on another episode. I'm going to move over to the other show. That
one has a lot of debate on that. But anyways, and then the highly acclaimed, the trilogy by, Christopher Nolan. So I geek out pretty much a lot on, Batman. And there's those comic book story arcs that, as a Batman fan, you always cherish. Like the 1999 one where the issue where the Joker shot Barbara, and the 1993 issue where Bane broke his back. And then the story arc with, Gotham, got hit by an earthquake, and these different issues, these are like the ones that we cherish, because those are the highlights, I guess, over the years. And then they did the new 52, like a revamp of the Batman story, 10 years ago. So that one, I mostly read that. And then I went into like Justice League, Wonder Woman, especially recently with the 2 Wonder Woman movies. So I started to read a lot of Wonder Woman. And then Marvel, I like Spider-Man. I like Doctor Strange. And also for Avengers, I also read that. And I also, before Avengers 2 Infinity Part 2 came out, I went out and read all the comic books that has reference on Infinity War, on Thanos, on all of that. Like I read probably 10 or 20 issues just to get some hints, like how are we gonna get these people back? And the movie came out, and it wasn't what I saw in the comics, but hey, it's all right,
So this is how it becomes really obvious if someone is a movie fan versus the comic book fan, is because they'll talk with very like absolutes about things that happen in the movie, or some, it'll be something like, well, we all know they're going to be trapped in the Soul Stone and not going to be released, that kind of thing. Which will make it obvious that, there's different ways in which this would have happened in the comics. What I love about the MCU is that it doesn't give us like panel for panel, book for book story, so that those of us who are comic book fans can still have surprises and still can enjoy it and stuff like that. But there are some things that Marvel in particular gives us that, like, they're telling a story for everybody, but they're hitting us with these little things for the fan, like the comic book fan. So one of the big ones in Endgame would be Captain America holding Mjolnir for the first time, for saying Avengers Assemble, things like that. Like they give us these moments because those are things that we want to see happen, like that we've seen a panel for, and we've fallen in love with a particular panel, and they'll try to mimic it and stuff like that. So they usually drop little things like that are for us. I like the way Trevor Noah says it on the host of The Daily Show, is when they're speaking in Kosa, he goes, "That's for me. That's not for you." I'm sitting in if I'm sitting in the seat and they give me a moment like that, that's for me. And, all of you will just get to hear it and whatever, but they did that for me. And I feel like they do that also with a lot of different things for the fans, like getting a chance to see Cap hold Mjolnir and all that kind of stuff. So getting into a brief summary of what Marvel in particular has done with the MCU since Iron Man is that basically Marvel, I think they started out hoping they can get to Avengers, and by introducing each individual main character, the major trilogy characters.
2008 started with Iron Man, and then we have the Hulk, and then we have
Captain
America. It wasn't until this year we had Black Widow, which I kind of glad they finally had one just for her, since one of the 6.
I feel like they should have actually done a hybrid movie similar to Falcon and Winter Soldier, but for Hawkeye and Black Widow, and address the whole
the backstory.
Yeah, so
we do know in the comic books they do hook up, but they never really did in the movies. And
they don't in the movie; they're just BFFs in the movie.
Yeah, and she actually kind of hooked up with the Hulk in Avengers too. So
again, that goes back to like the thing about comics is that they don't have to be exactly the same every time, and they'll redo canon or they'll redo continuity from time to time. And in this case, it was like, let's just have Scarlet has some good chemistry with Mark. Let Hulk and Scarlet or Hulk and Black Widow come together. I would have hated Black Widow and Hawkeye as a couple in the movies because of those two particular actors. But I didn't hate Scarlett's and Mark's chemistry. So I liked the fact that they just had a platonic friendship that was about like, you saved my life and gave me a new life, and now we're best friends, and I care about your wife and your kid and your kids and all that kind of stuff. Like I actually appreciate that dynamic. Because I'm very pro what I refer to as romantic friendships. Like they're platonic, but
it's someone that you want to do for. Like you're just so down.
Well, going into Shang-Chi that we just watched this weekend, the main character, Shang-Chi, and his friend, they never really like kissed or like
they're not romantic. Yeah.
You know, they ended up still being best friends.
Yeah, I do love that. So I do want to say just at the start of this, for anybody who's listening, there are going to be spoilers. So if you haven't watched it yet and you're not one of those diehards that have been just on day one, show one, got to see the movie, you can not listen to this until next week or whenever you see it. But yeah, we're definitely going to have to talk about spoilers because there's no way to get around some of the things. So let me just do a brief synopsis of Shang-Chi as it pertains to the MCU, so not connected to the books necessarily themselves, is that Shang-Chi is the story of the child of basically 1,000-year-old villain. And he has been trained from a very young age to be an assassin and to ultimately take over the organization known as the 10 Rings, in which we have had hints of the 10 Rings throughout the MCU. And basically it gets course corrected because it gets used kind of not great in earlier movies. So they course corrected the 10 Rings in the Shang-Chi movie. He's set up to be an assassin. He ends up leaving his father for a period of time and just living his life in San Francisco and becomes essentially an Asian American. So this is, while it is a story that has its origins in China, it is essentially an Asian American story, as in terms of how the movie portrays the main characters. And everything like that. And we basically enter the world in which Sean, which is what he goes by in America, Sean and his best friend Katie are two Chinese Americans that are just chilling in San Francisco, and they are
ballet parkers.
And they like their job. So I want to get into, I don't want to forget, we are going to address how they undo Asian American stereotypes very subtly in this movie, and being valet parkers is one of those things I want to hit on. So they're just walking around as valet parkers in San Francisco, being best friends. They love karaoke and hanging out, and they are the best of best friends, which I really do love, that we didn't necessarily need a romantic story between them, because again, I'm really pro friendship in these types of things. I think in movies and cinema in general and all kinds of media, we put too much emphasis on romance and sex partner relationships over how meaningful a lifelong friend is. And in this case, I think they do portray that with Katie and Sean. Sean and Katie, best friends. Something happens that makes Katie now aware of Shang-Chi's past and who he actually is. And then their adventure ensues, and they end up going back to China to be reunited with Shang-Chi's actual family. And there's the beginning of the story. So that's where we're at when we meet Sean. We meet a shirtless Sean waking up from a bad dream about his family, and we basically
he gets shirtless again later.
So we can talk a little bit about the story, or we can address representation and stereotypes early on. However what do you want to do? What do you want to talk about first?
We can jump in the story first. Okay. It's already talking to the story.
So I think in terms of how Shang-Chi fits in the Marvel universe itself, I love that it's a self-contained story, that you're not sitting here the whole time going, where are the Avengers? Or who's left? You're not worried the entire time about what's going on, which is actually something that has been a problem with some Marvel movies in the past, like Iron Man 3. The whole time you're like, this isn't big enough for another character to just roll up in and be like, hey, you need some help. There's certain things that have to do, like when you're used to people as an ensemble and then you give them their individual movie, there has to be a contained enough thing that it really isn't that big of a deal to have another character. And I think they did that here, because it wouldn't have made sense for randomly an Avenger to pop up and be like, hey, you're having some problems over here. Let me check this out.
No, they did kind of allude to the, being part of the Avengers at a post-credit scene.
in a post-credit scene, right?
We, which if you watch the movie, stay a little longer and watch that scene.
End, because there's a mid-credit scene and there's a post-credit scene. And I get it. Some people are just done with the experience, but the entire movie experience is trailers to the end of the credits. I don't care if there's something at the end.
Don't leave. Stay there and watch the whole thing. Pay attention.
Like in a Marvel movie, you definitely want to stay to the end of the credits because there's usually a post scene. But generally, like as a person who's worked in the film industry, and even before that, my family always stayed to the end because that was the experience. We wanted to know where things were shot. We wanted to know what music was in movies. But more than that, because I had an interest in film early on, we would look at the jobs, which I think is also a very Asian thing we could talk about here. Wow. We would look at what the jobs were so that we could see what was the things that I was going to be interested in doing in the future. I knew I wanted to make movies, but you don't always know what that means. You think that means actor, director, writer. And you probably don't know that there's usually 200 to 500 people working on a film set. And there's a lot of different jobs that you can have. And so that was actually something that my Japanese side of the family kind of instilled in me. When we would go to the movies, they would be like, do you know what a best boy is? And then we would go try to find out later what, and this is pre-internet because I'm older than all y'all. We would have to go and try to find out like what a best boy was, or, what an assistant director was, or what was a first unit versus a second unit and things like that. So, I am the person who thinks that you don't deserve a movie if you don't stay till the end of the credits, regardless of if there's a post-credit scene. But specifically because this is a Marvel movie, there are two credit scenes. One is mid-roll, one is post. So stay to the fucking end because that was infuriating the second time that I saw the movie.
I do also want to point out that, and I do want to point this out because the guy sitting next to me at the movie theater was so annoyed. I was livid. I was in it, but he wasn't. The first 10 minutes of this movie is in Mandarin. And I was actually pleasantly surprised and kind of excited that, wow, they actually committed, a Marvel Hollywood movie, committed to having the first 10 minutes all in Mandarin.
Right.
Legit jump in. The first sentence was in Mandarin up until he wakes up in his bedroom in San Francisco. It's his backstory or the beginning of his life. And there was so much Mandarin that this guy sitting next to me got very frustrated and turned to me. I guess I looked and then said, "Is this whole movie gonna be in Chinese? Should I leave?" And I looked at him and said, "No, you can't see the subtitles. The subtitles are huge. You can read them."
Yeah.
So I looked at him like, come on now. Like, for real? So he did stay at the end till the end. But I could tell the guy next to me, was very frustrated about that. But anyways,
this is very annoying because I think unlike Black Panther, which opened with accented English, so African accented English in telling a mini part of that story in the beginning. They did lace Kosa all the way through the movie here and there or whatever. But I agree with you. Opening right out the gate, coming out of the gate with Mandarin, it was like, this is an Asian story. This is a specific Chinese story. The characters are going to be in America, but when they're not in America, with the exception of Chinese later on, it goes back and forth between English and stuff like that. But when they're not in America, you're going to get this Mandarin. Like, you're going to get this language. And I think that is an important thing because also the more access to hearing languages that is not your natural language, the less foreign it becomes, right? The less the thing that makes foreignness scary to people or uncomfortable or maddening to people.
So do you remember that movie that came out last year called Minari? It is a Korean American story in the Midwest, but most of the movie was in Korean.
Oh, I didn't.
But they didn't. I believe the Golden Globes didn't allow it to enter as an American movie, because but placed it as a foreign, because more than half of the movie was in Korean, even though it's an American person that produced the movie. And it's a Korean American story. Like, this family is a real family that came from Korea, went to the Midwest to start their own life. So you have stuff like this where, people, a lot of people, they still have problems hearing non-English on the screen. And they hear when it's not English, oh, this is foreign. This is not Hollywood.
The crazy thing is it depends on the otherness of the people that are being represented, because I remember this from childhood. The opening of The Hunt for Red October, which is a movie based off of a book that has to do with the same character, the Jack Ryan character from like Patriot Games and stuff like that. The opening of the movie is in Russian, and they're on a Russian submarine. And as it zooms into the main character, or as it zooms into the character speaking, it gets close to their faces, and when it backs away, it switches from Russian to English. And it's it's their way of showing you, we're still speaking Russian on this ship, but now you can understand us. So it goes from translated, subtitled Russian to a zoom into the character and then a pull back in English. And it was just, I always thought about this, especially as a film like nerd or geek type of person. I always thought that was a great way of letting people know where somebody, like who these people are and where they come from, but giving it accessibility to Americans. Now, as a grown person, I'm like, read the damn subtitles. It's not that hard. Like okay, if you don't have any reading issues, it's not that hard. I understand that there's different levels of literacy and different speeds at which people read and stuff like that. And reading movies can be very frustrating. I understand that. But in terms of the masses, you should just be able to handle it a little bit, because guess what? There are tons of movies that you are missing out on because your resistance to listening to a language that's not yours. So in the case of Hunt for Red October, it was heralded as this like very creative way of introducing a language and whatever, and getting it back into English. But also Russians are white. So was it as big of a problem? Because there's a lot of movies that we actually hear Russian or French or German laced in that you don't hear a whole lot of people saying, I wish that movie about Nazis didn't have so much German in it. You know what I'm saying? But if it's a movie that showcases different brown people that have different languages, you tend to hear this frustration of just like subtitled movies are so difficult. I mean, if that were true, then half of the white teenage population that's into anime wouldn't function. But there is the generation of people that really are frustrated with that. And I loved it, but I also kind of wish that I understand why they have to put it mostly in English, but I wish there were more moments in which it would go back and forth, like even in just the broken wig. So like one thing that they did, which I think was a very much like an Asian family dynamic thing, is when one relative spoke in Chinese and the other one answered.
And they respond in English. Yep, at the table, the breakfast table.
And my family does that too in Japanese, right? Like if we understand what is happening, we can answer back in English, but we may not be comfortable answering in Japanese, or vice versa. So that is something I think that is a very very much a product of. I think is very relatable to those of us that grew up here in the States that have an Asian family. Is there was moments like that it wasn't thrown at people. It was just actually how we live. And there was certain things like that weren't very heavy-handed in addressing the fact that we're watching an Asian family or anything like that. But it was so much like, it was one of those moments where I was like, that's for us. Like the creative team did that for us, because they know we all have that experience of one family member speaking in one language and the other one, answering back in English. So I really do. I do like that. Before we talk about some of the stereotypes, because I really want to get into how they unstereotyped things. Because I think they did a really great job.
The first one was the valet parking attendant.
The valet parking thing. So my biggest thing about them being valet drivers is not only that they were valet drivers, but that they had talent in their drive, or at least Katie, I guess, is the only one we get to see it. She has some insane talent in her driving.
You'll see her drive later in the movie too, guys.
She will. And so it's one of these things where like Asians in America have this bad driver stereotype.
Especially women.
especially women. At the same time, we also have Asians are race car drivers or speed car drivers or tricked out car drivers. Mm-hmm. So we're either the worst drivers or we only do stunt driving. You know, like it doesn't make sense. There's like opposing stereotypes, but Shang-Chi doesn't give us a moment to feel any kind of way. We go straight into like insane excitement, Katie's eyes like, I'm going to drive the hell out of this car. And Shang being like, no, we don't want to get in trouble. We don't want to lose our jobs, to complete stunt driving. And that car doesn't have a scratch on it. And then later on, she drives a bus and keeps people alive. And later on, she drives another car in another stunt type of way and keeps everybody going just fine. Because I didn't even realize until you just said that we actually don't see Shang-Chi drive. We see only Katie drive. Yeah, so we only have an Asian woman driver in the movie. So that's pretty solid. I really like that. So that was one thing that I thought they did really, really well. And it was I love that they gave us moments that a lot of us that are Asian American kids or generate, like either first or second generation Americans can relate to, like, yeah, okay, everybody knows at this point we all take our shoes off outside of the house. We get that. But if it wasn't there, it would stand out. So yeah, and they even zoomed in to him taking his shoes off before walking in. Right. That was like they did that the right way. Like we know it would have stand out if he hadn't done that and all that kind of stuff. So that was good. But even just the idea of like your friend that comes into the house and the mother just hands them a bowl and it's just like, that kind of like, even that, it was just like, you're this adopted friend, family member that just gets to come in. You call your friend's grandparents or mother and father, auntie, uncle, grandma, whatever. You get your bowl, you sit there and eat. But one of the things that I really loved is that even while Katie was being sort of, I guess, like talked down to by her mother and she was ready to leave, Shang still finished his food before he left, because he's like, I know that you're going to get in trouble, but I need to finish this bowl so I don't get yelled at. Like, I feel like there were different things like that happened that I feel like only an Asian writer would have written it in and known that we would pick up on what they were doing. And so when I'm talking about this, I am generalizing, of course, but I am talking about sort of the crossover of things that happens, at least I'll say in East Asia. I don't want to claim that this movie is representative of all Asians, but there's at least crossover enough that even though it's a Chinese story, as a mixed Japanese, I could relate to a lot of the things that they had in the film as well. Yeah. So that there was just little moments like that. They were so subtle and so sweet, I guess, too, that I really appreciated that care. I really don't feel like anything stood out terribly as like, oh, they just didn't get it. I feel like they had people on deck, or they had enough people around that were explaining what was going on. Even as they do things like, they went to karaoke and they call it. That's a typical Asian stereotype. It's a very typical thing. That was probably the most standout thing. And also the fact that they call it karaoke. Like, we've just adopted the fact that that's how Americans say it. So that's how it's said, when that's not how we would say it back, or that's not how my family would say it back home and stuff like that. But how do you say it? How do you say it? Like karaoke. Yeah, Cantonese is karaoke. Yeah. So, because we have, I guess in that respect, we have the similar A sound and like that too. So, A vowel sound. But yeah, like there's that. But also I think that's realistic too. Like, like no Chinese American kid is going to call it karaoke just on behalf of other Asians. Like I get it. So I don't freak out about stuff like that, because that also is very natural. There's also the Asian stereotype, because they were on the bus and they're staring at another Asian girl that was doing her paper on the bus. Yeah. But even that, they were addressing it, right? Like, Katie was saying, like, that's the kind of good
person that my mom wants me to be.
My mom wants me to be. Mm-hmm. And that is a thing. Like, that is a thing within our community about the, drive to higher education, all this other kind of stuff. And this discussion that a lot of us mixed or Asians or Asian American mixed Asian kids will talk about. Like, I did that thing. I went to Berkeley. I got the big degree. I just want to drive this car. I don't want to do the things related to this thing. And so therefore I am a disappointment. And I think that was even that was also something that wasn't necessarily for the white audience. That was kind of speaking to us. Like, yeah, your mother loves you. Yeah, she would rather you be a very driven student or something like that than a valet driver. But I even feel like that was something that they put in as a for us thing. Because I don't think it wasn't glaring enough for like other Americans to walk out of there and be like, oh man, Chinese are really tough on their kids, Like, I don't think that necessarily would have been the thing.
So I want to ask you, there are two scenes. There's one scene in the beginning and one at the end of the movie before they left with Wong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where Shang-Chi and Katie, they meet with this couple at dinner and talking about their lives. And there's this contrast from, they had the meeting before they went on to this adventure and there's a meeting at the end. Mm-hmm. What do you think the significance of this meeting with this couple?
I think that was just a way to give a shorthand of exposition without having to get. It was a way of letting us understand why Shang and Katie weren't romantic. I think by in the beginning giving us she just came in and saved me and we became friends ever since kind of a thing. So then that way you're not the whole movie going, but why won't they kiss? But why won't they kiss?
But then also their friend, which seems to be Middle Asian and she's married to a Caucasian person.
No, he read as South Asian to me. That actor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So So that couple, right? Especially the woman, seems very like looking down on us. Well, I grew up. I became a lawyer. Is a lawyer or something?
Something like that.
You guys are still parking.
Yeah.
So I find that conversation interesting. That has changed from at the end of the movie.
When they're like save the world basically. And so I think what's happening there is also really interesting too, because I think what we're seeing is a Asian that ended up behaving right, the child of an immigrant that behaved correctly against these two that aren't necessarily behaving correctly, quote, quote, quote. And seeing what that dynamic is, because there is an intense amount of pressure within the Asian immigrant children of immigrant communities. There's an insane amount of pressure that we as children of these families deal with. And some of us stay on track and some of us don't, and it's that divide between how your family and I think that is a way of showing us that exists in them, that was their dynamic. She grew up, they didn't. And then the flip of it is showing, look, you don't have to follow a particular path. You can still do amazing things if you go a different way. So I think that's what we're getting with those two things. What I do love, and I'm going to go ahead and say it, what I do love about this movie is that with the exception of Razor Arm or Razor Fist guy, there's no significant white people in this movie. There's no significant anything but Asian in this movie. You know what I'm saying? Like, even though the white guy is kind of a second in line. No, he's not even a second in line. He doesn't read like a second in line.
He's a henchman.
He reads like a number one henchman. Yeah, he's like a number one henchman. He's not a leader, but he's the number one henchman. Everybody who did anything with purpose in this movie was an Asian.
With purpose.
And that, I think, was the most amazing thing they could do. Because we didn't ever have a white savior. We didn't ever have a person to come in and give us the solution to the problem. And ultimately, that white person was control. He
was humble.
He was humble
that way.
Yes, exactly. So I think that there are things like that they did in terms of the pure representation of because there are so many things like the emasculation of Asian men, or the the somehow we are these masters of kung fu and karate, but we somehow are also the weakest people thing that gets used as over and over and over again as stereotypes that this movie did not exhibit any of. Shang-Chi had to find his strength over time, but that's the journey. That's the hero's journey. He had to go from a low place to a high place to achieve his goal. But he was never whooped back into shape, basically, by like an all-knowing, all-powerful white person, which tends to happen in a lot of movies. So I thought that was great. Because even Ben Kingsley, who comes back,
I hope if you haven't watched the movie, that is a spoiler. But oh my gosh,
it was so showed up.
Like, he's back.
He's so back, and he's just chewing up the scenery, which I just love. But even
he went anywhere. Like, okay, that's it in Iron Man 3. No, he came back.
Yeah. No, I love that they, because that was the question everybody had going into this, is how are you going to reconcile the fact that you had a character playing the Mandarin as a fake character with the 10 rings in the background, but now you're actually going to have the Mandarin, so I really loved how they addressed it, and I love that they addressed it separately. That family dinner where
he said, this guy was playing me. Like, people have given me many names. Oh yeah, we found this guy that was just faking me, and then later on they found him when you actually see him.
And he's great too, because he's also an Asian man. Like, he is British, but he is Indian. So to have yet another person who plays a role, a role of somewhat significance, but isn't a white person.
Yeah, I know him from playing Gandhi in the movie many years ago.
I guess he gets a lot of white adjacency because he's got the British accent and he grew up in England and everything like that. But he is of Indian heritage, so he's in the same way that we have to deal with being mixed and half, and if that's enough, he absolutely had to as well. So I do really like that part. So let's talk about the romance part of it, because there is the thing about
mom and dad, the romance and kung fu around. That moment,
the romance of anything, like the parents, like that was such a sexy scene.
That was nice without any overtly kissing or
It wasn't like overly gratuitous or anything.
Elegantly done.
It was beautiful, and it was so funny too, because you're like, don't make me like this villain because he sees this woman and he's like, you amaze me, and I'm about this. It was so sweet, but it's also very much a nod to a lot of like the older, like the wushu movies and stuff like that, which I guess aren't that old. They're only 20 years old, but they were giving you those vibes and stuff like that. And so, people did talk about like, why doesn't Shang-Chi have a romantic interest? But that's like, let's build up who he is as a character before we worry about whether or not he has a love interest. Cap had a love interest from the start. Iron Man gained his love interest, but she had been around from the start. Like, I get it. People like that kind of stuff. But that they allowed the parents to be the romantic part of the movie, and they gave Shang they just let Shang-Chi be his own guy. I actually appreciated way more. But also because I like that dynamic of a really close friend that like will get on the plane with no context. Like, I'm here to support your life because you're my friend. So I like it, but I really do like how the parents fell in love, because it's not like, oh, you're so hot, I love you now. It's like, oh, you have a talent and you're better than me at this, and I love you now. But I really like that. I thought that was cute. That was sweet.
Yeah. I also like that the younger sister Xiaoling. He found him in Macau being like the boss of a fighting ring. And I want to bring that up because even now, it's a little better now, but women's rights is not, there's still a big struggle with women's rights across many Asian countries. Right. So it's really nice to see an Asian, a female boss.
You're right.
in the movie. So
and she owned it too. She didn't ever go damsel. Which is something Wonder Woman does become a damsel, which is so ridiculous in these movies because you're literally stronger than the dude you're asking to help you right now. Like, this is stupid. But with her, she never had that moment. Like, even when she got hurt, she got back up. Like, she didn't have one of those weak moments.
Yeah, and she clearly told her brother, like, I didn't need you then, I don't need you now.
I got this. Yeah. No, I really like her. And I think so this is another divide that's something different from the comics than what happens in the movie. They basically put Shang-Chi's 5 sisters into one person. So she's going to be a complicated character as Shang-Chi 2 comes and all that kind of stuff. Because ultimately it didn't look like she was giving up the rings, or in terms of the organization. Shang-Chi has the rings, the physical rings, but she has the 10 rings. So, she might be kind of a hybrid character for a period of time. She might go dark too because of, power and all that kind of stuff. But I liked her whole deal. There was not a moment I didn't like how she owned a room or how she owned a space or anything like that. I thought the character was great. And I also like how they address the complicated sibling relationship when, like, in my family, we're mostly girls. And so my brother is like it's me and my brother. My mom only has sisters. My grandmother has mostly sisters and one brother. And that brother, and despite the fact that my grandmother was the oldest and also tested into the highest level of university, the brother was the person who got to go to university because he was the boy, right? So this dynamic of like the girl could be smarter and or more talented potentially, but is overlooked. It was another subtle part of the story that just happens, but it's not like screaming you in the face of like, China, do better. It was just more of just like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many ways in which movies could be addressing stereotypes as a way of saying this is an attack on whatever culture is being represented. And in this case, I don't feel like that was happening. It was really more addressing like, this is actually a real world thing that happens to us, in which sometimes the female children are overlooked or end up not valued in the same way that the boy is, because look, he ultimately ends up being the hero. But if you look at it, she was doing a lot of goddamn work before before he got to hero. And even at that point, she's instructing him to a degree, telling him to go do the work and all that kind of stuff. So I think that was also a very interesting thing to show us, that dynamic of like, it's hard to, sometimes it's rough with your siblings, because one of them gets valued in a weird way. I'm
wondering if they're trying to be realistic here because, it's fun fact. It wasn't until 4 years ago that you can have 2 kids in China. And it wasn't until last week or 2 weeks ago that now you can have 3 children in China. So maybe it would have come off as really weird if they had that many siblings.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why let's just condense it to like 2 kids, a boy and a girl.
No, I agree. So, I think that's probably right. Because also that's another thing about like when Shang-Chi was originally written, they were written by white people. When Black Panther was originally written, they were written by white people. And it took decades until a person from either a person of color or a person from that same group could write those books. Like Black Panther doesn't get written by a Black person until the 90s for the first time. Shang-Chi, I don't actually know. That's actually something I should have looked up, but I think it's only recently that he's been written by a person of color, and I don't necessarily even know if he's been written by a Chinese person over just a person of color. Because I think there's a lot of like Latinx people that are writing characters that are, but they're still being written by a brown person, but they're not being written by a brown person from that ethnic group necessarily. So actually, I don't know if Shang-Chi has ever been written outside of this movie. But by an Asian person, let alone specifically a Chinese person. How do you think it fits in terms of, like, how would you rank it against any of the other Marvel movies? Because I know you've seen them all.
Oh, man. I feel like this.
I'll give you 2 ways to rank it.
Okay.
How do you think it ranks overall across all the MCU movies?
Okay.
And separately, how do you think it ranks as a Asian hero story?
Asian hero story. I think for MCU, I think it's definitely up there. I would say definitely top 10, maybe top 5, but definitely top 10. I'm still can't get over with Thor and Ragnarok. I really like Thor and Ragnarok.
It's so good.
Yes, I really like Taika Waititi. You can't go wrong with that guy.
You really kind of can't.
Yeah. Oh man, I don't know if X-Men probably don't fit in, although X-Men.
We can speak specifically about, like, from Iron Man through to.
I like the Captain America origin movie. I did like that a lot. I like the last 2 Infinity movies. Just the hype and build up on that, obviously. So I would say, definitely top 10, maybe 5th or 6th up there. Okay. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think Thor Ragnarok is still number 1 for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's so good. It's so good. I'm
still
having a hard time moving that one out of the top.
I'm actually looking forward to the Eternals coming out, because I got comics from you. Mm-hmm. Check out Gulf Coast Comics. I got comics from you a few months ago on,
that's right, you did get the Eternals.
On the Eternals, because I'm reading to prepare for this movie to come up.
Know who some of the characters are, yeah.
So hopefully that movie also ranks pretty good too. The Black Widow that came out this year, it's okay. I'm not hating it entirely, but it wasn't bad. But Shang-Chi is definitely better, hands down. So for a Asian American hero story, I would say, I would say it's pretty up there too. I don't know.
I don't want to make assumptions, but because I specifically refer to it as I think it's more of an Asian American hero than an Asian hero necessarily, but I don't want to make that assumption for you. Does it? Because you're actually born in Hong Kong.
True. So the thing is, I do relate to Shang-Chi in that way, because I came to America when I was 12, and he moved here when he was 14. Yeah. As a preteen or teenager. And I feel like him in the movie, Shang-Chi does consider himself, and the movie does address it many times. I've been here for 10 years. Yeah. So I'm practically an American. Yeah. I kind of have that feeling too. I've been here for so long. I consider myself American, but, I recognize I'm born somewhere else, but I also recognize I'm an American now, like a naturalized American.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
I think in terms of an Asian American story, I think it's pretty well done. And I also mentioned that other movie, that Minari. I think you should check it out.
I did want to see it, but it was during COVID and there wasn't any streaming for it that I saw at the time.
But that's another Asian American story that came out recently. That's also pretty good too. So.
And that has the guy that played Glenn from Walking Dead in there, right?
Yes.
So let's use that as one last thing to talk about. The Asian American male lead.
Okay.
We don't have many. We don't have many here in the States that we can go to as the go-to Asian American guy.
So, okay. Recently, we have that guy from Crazy Rich Asians, Henry Golding. Right. Now, he's half Asian, half British, right? Yeah. So he led Crazy Rich Asians, and then he went on to become, he went on to be on a romantic comedy called Last Christmas. And then 2 months ago, he became the lead in Snake Eyes.
Yeah.
So recently we have this person that has been in the lead. And who else? I've always watched Jackie Chan. So, I do consider him to be a lead when we had the Rush Hour movies and we had Shanghai Moon, Shanghai Night, and many other movies he was in. So that's another one that comes to my head. However, I feel like for Asian or Asian American men, it tends to be either action or comedy, and it's not like many romantic.
If they are romantic, they are aligned with some kind of whiteness, which is why I think Henry Golding gets to kind of do that, because he's got the British accent and can kind of, I feel like he is erased as an Asian in movies that he does here. Except for Crazy Rich Asians, which that movie is very frustrating for me. I don't think it was necessarily the Asian representation we needed in America. That one was tough. But yeah, you're right. It either goes like the comical Asian, like Ken Jeong, Dr. Ken, right? Or they're like the action star like Jackie Chan, but you don't often get somebody who is an action star, but also a very masculine, probably attractive to a lot of heterosexual people.
Daniel Day Kim in Hawaii Five-0. Right. Almost forgot about him. Yeah, him also action though.
He also action too, but he gets called hot, where Jackie Chan would never be called.
No, that's true.
Right.
That's true.
And hotness is different in Asia than it is here in the States. You're like when you're seeking out your male partner in different Asian countries, you're not looking necessarily for
like built and muscular. You're looking for someone that's cute with good skin,
good job. Good stability. Like those are the qualities that are like you seek, or you're trained to seek back home. Whereas here it is kind of a hotness thing first. Where with Simu, I kind of feel like you're getting an action star who's funny, who's also kind of hot.
Yeah, he's in Kim's Convenience on Netflix. Yeah.
He's very goofy, and I when I do like dudes, I do like a goofy dude. But he's tall and muscular and all that kind of stuff. So like in terms of checking off the aesthetic boxes, he's tall, he's muscular, he's got abs, he can move his body and fight and all that kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff is good. But he got it real hard from China. They China press was rough.
I think I mentioned it to you too. Like their vision of a hot and sexy guy is, I guess, is not
him.
Not him. I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
Really?
And I think he's cute. And, I'll be honest, like I predominantly find, in terms of men, I predominantly find Black men attractive. That's the people that I've been around most, the people that I find attractive most often. I very rarely find white people attractive, although like I like Ryan Reynolds, but again, he's a goofy dude. So that's why I like him more for his goofiness than necessarily his whiteness. I've had crushes on a couple of Japanese actors that are they known here? Takeshi, I don't think I remember his name, but he's half Japanese and half Taiwanese. It was pretty hot like 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. But that's like, I'll send you a link because I know what movie he's in, but I can't think of his last name. But there wasn't like a time period where I had just pictures of boys on my wall. And if I did, that they were all Asian necessarily. But I think with Simu, like people were kind of, I feel China was rough on him, but aesthetics for Chinese attractiveness is different than Western.
Definitely.
And so in terms of Western aesthetics, I think he hits those marks more so, even though he's full-blooded, I think he checks those boxes, but also he's like obsessed with boy bands from the 90s, and he wanted to be like that. So that's his whole.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
He wanted to be a Backstreet Boy when he was a teenager.
Okay. All right. I was actually doing a little research on other Asian Americans that have appeared in the MCU. So obviously we had Benedict Wong that plays Wong, right? We also had Dave Bautista. He's half Filipino.
Yeah.
And he plays Drax. And he's also the similar thing, like he's a big build, but he's also funny though. He plays, a big muscular guy that's very powerful, but also funny. So also that funny aspect. And then you have, if you watch Spider-Man, the last two Spider-Man movies, Spider-Man's best friend is Ned.
His best friend is Filipino.
He's Filipino, right? Also a funny guy, right? And you have a few women like Gemma Chen, right? Oh my gosh,
season two. She Marvel.
had the gold, had a Captain Marvel and the Eternals.
Yeah.
So
and then actually Michelle Yeoh is in Guardians too.
She did have a cameo in there. Yeah, and then I guess she's in this movie, Shang-Chi. Yes.
I shout out to Benedict Wong because I love that guy. I have loved that guy for years. He's a British actor.
So one thing I was upset, I think the show he was on Netflix did him wrong. Because my husband was watching that show on Polo. It's called Polo on Netflix. He played Genghis Khan on that show on Netflix.
Oh, really?
But they focus so much on the white guy, which is Michael Polo.
Right.
So that I feel like that show did
again. That's exactly what I'm worried about. Every time there's a major Asian movie, or there's a movie that has Asians in it that is a Western-made movie, it always centers the white guy. Last Samurai, Tom Cruise. Ken Watanabe is the last samurai in that movie, but he's not on the poster. Tom Cruise is on the poster. The Great Wall, Matt Damon. In what world?
I'm still mad
in
about
what world? I didn't see it, but because
it was interesting.
I absolutely
that's CGI, but anyways.
But in what world does that kind of make sense? So that's one thing that I'm really grateful for. I'm not just grateful, and I think it's important. I think it's just as equally important to show a movie that doesn't have a whole lot of white people in, that is American made, as it is to not really have any. Like we had one guy, okay, fine, we had one guy, but he wasn't central to the story in any way, shape, or form. He could have been out of it and the movie would have been the same. So that means everybody with agency that mattered was an Asian person. And that is way more meaningful. That's actually even something that Black Panther didn't necessarily give us, because you have Tim Freeman helping Wakandans. He didn't win it for Wakanda. He didn't have the ideas to win it for Wakanda, but he was a part of it. You know what I'm saying? So even Black Panther, that gave us so much.
They still have that guy. That guy.
And the thing is, that character is important to that world and all that kind of stuff. Okay, fine. And I love him too. Tim Freeman's fine. But in terms of what Shang-Chi did, I feel differently. Like Black Panther made me emotional on a level that I still can't really fully explain. To see all that blackness, to see non-colonized blackness, to see Chadwick performing.
God bless him.
Angela Bassett, like everybody, there's so much about that movie I can't live without now. Like it needs to be existing all the time. Shang-Chi, even though I'm not Chinese, as an Asian American, I'm excited to see a whole movie. And I mean specifically big screen, like going to see it in the big screen was important. To see that many Asian people on the big screen in a movie in which they are the ones with agency was very important to me too. And you know what? For anybody who felt uncomfortable listening to Mandarin, feel uncomfortable. It's fine. You can go 2-hour movie with 5 minutes of it in a different language and still walk out of the movie
fine.
Live. It's possible. So yeah, I think that's something that I think Shang-Chi gives us, that that I'm not sure that any other movie really had. They had announced for me as a Japanese person, when they announced the 47 Ronin was being made, was being made about the 47 Ronin, which is a huge, significant event in Japanese history. And then they said Keanu Reeves is going to be in it because they had so many actual Japanese actors, and I was so excited, especially like Sonata is one of my favorite actors of all time. I adore Sonata. And then they say Keanu's in it. I'm like, okay. You know, and I love Keanu. Keanu's one of those people that almost can't do wrong for me. I absolutely adore him. But he's not Japanese, and he's not, and the fact that they created a character and referred to him as a half-breed the entire time pissed me off so much. Because it wasn't necessary to the story. And actually, it's more specific that he is the child of who he is and not some half-breed child of who he is, like to the real life event that bothers me. And then I also was bothered by the fact that they had a Chinese dragon woman come in when she wasn't a part of the story in real life. Like it's basically like taking Gettysburg, the battle for Gettysburg, and throwing somebody in it with mystical powers that could just make a magical horse. Okay. That's essentially what happens.
So it doesn't make sense. Okay.
It doesn't make sense because the 47 Ronin is an actual event that occurred in history, an actual battle. But magically there was a Chinese lady that had a mystical dragon that came in and
like, how did she end up in Japan?
I think she played a Japanese person. They just hired that one actress that is like the Asian actress. If we put an Asian in a movie here, I forget her name, but she also was in Memoirs of a Geisha. She was from
that lady. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, like it was just like, you know, yeah, we're giving you mostly a Japanese cast, but you can have this also. But yeah, like she conjured a dragon. Like, give me more Asian stereotype if you can. Shang-Chi also has a dragon, but the dragon is integral to the character. Like it's part of how he gets his power and everything like that. But they did specifically use a Chinese dragon, which was good. Whereas like in Ronin 47, it was just kind of like an arbitrary hybrid between a Japanese and a Chinese dragon. Because, you know, we have different toe counts and we have different, the beard on the Chinese dragon is a lot different than the beard on a Japanese dragon and stuff like that. And it was sort of like a hybrid of those two. It's kind of like when someone says, I really like Asian design. And then you look and you see that they've got like a Chinese, like they have like a Japanese wall scroll, but they have like a Chinese, design palette or color thing or whatever. Like they're just like Asian. It's all of the things. That's what they did for Ronin. So I'm glad that with Shang-Chi, I don't feel that there wasn't anything that really was glaringly not correctly Asian or specifically Chinese. I feel, I don't know. But yeah, Wong, going back to, I guess the reason why I came up is that he plays a character that is like, tell me that Marco Polo was a bigger influence on the world than Genghis Khan, when literally there's people who get their DNA tested to this day and can find if they trace back to him.
That region right there. Yep.
Let's calm down, everybody. But I love that actor. I love Benedict Wong. He's hilarious. I've been watching him and stuff since he was in BBC TV and stuff like that. He's great. I love him. Oh, the half Japanese, half Taiwanese guy, the actor that I really like, his last name is Kaneshiro.
Okay.
But yeah, anyway, so we actually went over. I thought we were going to just talk for a little bit, but I'm just so happy to talk to someone else that would get some of those moments that are meaningful to me too, even though, again, this is why I think representation is important. I don't know that it's not more meaningful to me because I'm not mixed Chinese, but as just an Asian American person, it was meaningful to me to see that many Asians on screen with agency. And I was excited about it the whole time. Whereas Black Panther, even though it's a fake African nation, there's some.
Shang-Chi is fake too, but still, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, he has a fake nation too, I guess, if you think about it. He's got a fake mystical realm. the things that they did in Wakanda spoke very much to those of us who grew up in the African diaspora to a degree, even though it's a non-colonized, isolated place. There were just some moments that just like spoke to that part of me. Maybe if Shang-Chi was a Japanese character, it might have that same effect, but really it was the fact that I was seeing Asian people in a Western movie. Where Asianness was just there. Like, it didn't matter. I mean, it matters in terms of like, he's an Asian American character and he was going to China and he was protecting people against this mystical thing that was happening.
Crazy looking beast. I don't know what that is.
No, yeah, that beast was pretty gross. The soul eater thing was pretty gross. But like, he was just a hero. He wasn't a hero of just Asia. You know what I'm saying? Like, what he saved ultimately impacted the entire world, whether people knew it or not. That's important. That's an important aspect of Marvel movies, I think, specifically. And it wasn't just like every 5 seconds. It was just like Asian. You know, like, it was just a movie that happened to have Asian people in it. And I've basically been wanting stuff like that forever.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. So the next one, do you know, you probably know this, the Marvels is set to come out. So we'll have Captain Marvel and Mrs. Marvel in that movie. And Mrs. Marvel is a teenage, I think Pakistani. Is it Pakistani?
Yeah, and her name is Kamala Khan, and she is such a fun character because she is obsessed with superheroes. She happens to have become one too, but she is like the biggest fangirl for superheroes, and then she becomes one. So every time you introduce her to another band of heroes, even though there's like life is falling apart and we all need to save the world, she's like, oh my God, Captain America. Like, you know, she just geeks out totally. And I think it's so cute. It's such a fun character. And we're also going to have Monica Rambeau, who is the first Captain America Marvel in the books, but not in the movie. The first human Captain Marvel, she is going to be in the Marvels as well and reunited with Carol and all that kind of stuff because she was the child in the Captain Marvel movie, but played by Tiona Paris, who is in my top 5 of people that I am romantically involved in, whether or not she knows it.
Oh, okay.
We have a romance. She doesn't know. She hasn't been around, but I love her. Yeah, so that'll be good. But you know, Gemma, we get Gemma back in the Eternals. We also have Kamali Nanjiani, who is also Pakistani. There is one other Asian American actor that's in that in the Eternals, and I don't know who he's playing.
It's not coming to my head right now.
But we're definitely starting to see more of the diverse characters and quite frankly characters that are more popular now anyway. Wakanda Forever is going to introduce Riri Williams, which is the Ironheart character, and she's a Black woman. And probably, I don't know for sure, but it's possible that the Spider-Man movies could introduce Silk, which is an Asian spider character. So
is that who I think it is? Is it the Korean girl that in the black suit?
She's in an all black suit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's so many more options now, especially as they introduce the Spider-Verse, and since we're going to have the Multiverse of Madness, we could literally have a Japanese Captain America because variants exist and they can literally throw anything at us. If we had a crocodile Loki in Loki, we could have.
I need to catch up on What Ifs because Marvel's What Ifs, that show just came out. I need to watch that.
It comes out on Wednesdays. There are 4 episodes in so far. The first 2 episodes I really loved. The third one was okay for me. The fourth one was
spoil anything for me.
The fourth one was a Doctor Strange story.
Okay.
It's a what if for Doctor Strange. And then this one that's coming up, I don't know for sure, but I think the one that's coming up tomorrow is what if zombies. Basically, what if everybody was
That is interesting. Okay.
I think so.
We don't got enough zombie stories in the MCU, so
there is a series of books called Zombies, which basically is all of the Marvel characters in zombie form, like in zombie form or something like that. So there are some. But really, when you get into if you want like proper zombies, like old zombie stories, you would go into, I think they're called True Adventures or something.
Okay.
They're older books that keep coming back to let everybody know that they exist and stuff like that. But when Marvel had their more pulpy stories, pulp fiction stories, zombies would have been a part of some of those, I think.
Okay.
But yeah. Why don't you tell everybody how to check out your show and how to find you on the interwebs?
Sure. So I have a YouTube channel called Naturally MonaLisa. You can check me out on YouTube. You can also check me out on Instagram and Twitter. Also, the handle is Naturally MonaLisa.
Why don't you tell everybody what you do on that show?
So on YouTube, I talk a lot of different things that means to me. So half of the content is about my journey finding products that is good for my skin because I struggle with eczema. So I talk a lot about the different products, like hair products, skin products, even cleaning products, perfume, deodorant, period products, you name it, that doesn't cause any type of reaction for me. So if you struggle with that, check me out. The other half of my content has to do with my mixedness. So most recently, I had a video on what's it like being mixed and how do I answer the question, what are you, where you're from, these type of struggles. And I also have review content in Chinese to address Black Lives Matter in Chinese because we don't have enough content in Chinese that stresses that. So.
No, I think that's amazing work, and I'm so glad that you do it, and I'm so glad to have you in my life, and I really appreciate you, and and thanks for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Militantly Mixed is a ManeHustle media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Charmaine Fury. Music is by David Bogan the One. You can follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Militantly Mixed. If you'd like to become a sponsor of Militantly Mixed, please go to patreon.com/militantlymixed for monthly sponsorship or paypal.me/militantlymixed for a one-time only donation. And if you like what you hear on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to be your mixed-ass self. ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.